Hello there, today I will be sharing thoughts on the Edgic for this first episode of Survivor. If you don't know what the Edgic is, I will link a great article from Inside Survivor in the description explaining it all. I will go through each player and give my thoughts on their edit from episode 1, winning chances, and whether I consider them a contender to win. These abilities are determined by how much they are on screen, how many confessionals they have, and if they receive any SPV. First off, we have the first boot of the season, Abraham. The content he received is what I would qualify for a middle-of-the-road rating. He gave us his job, tried to put the target onto Tiffany, and was voted off for it. The other boot of the premiere is Sarah. She was shown very positively with her confessional about her grandmother's passing, which was enough to earn her a positive tone. The rest of her content in this episode didn't elevate her to a middle-of-the-road or a complex personality rating, which leaves her episode overall with the one-dimensional rating of over-the-top positive. Brad received a confessional introducing himself, sharing with us his job and the passing of his father, which gives him a positive tone. However, Brad also receives some negative tone for openly targeting Sarah and Shan to their faces. Brad did not have more beyond this, so he receives an over-the-top mixed rating. As it stands, I do not have Brad as a high chance to win after his episode 1, as he did not look great pointing out Sarah and Shan as targets to their faces. Danny had a lot of focus in episode 1, leading him to be one of our higher screen time players. Danny was toneless throughout the episode, and mostly just gave us narration of the sweat challenge and prisoner's dilemma twist. He was shown to volunteer for the sweat challenge while Voce told us that choosing it was not a good idea, which is not a great look for him. Most of his confessionals were also not complex, as he didn't introduce himself or his strategy, earning him a middle-of-the-road rating. He has good initial screen time, but I would put Danny's winning chances in the middle of the pack. Deshawn, like Danny, volunteered for the sweat challenge, but got little focus for it. This focus went to Danny instead, which does not bode well for Deshawn. He didn't give us much else this episode, putting his rating at a middle-of-the-road, and a winning chance at the lower end of the cast. Erika received a quick early confessional, and gave a confessional about Danny and Deshawn looking for idols, but outside of that she didn't show us much. She did name the prisoner's dilemma twist by name, but her rating this episode is a middle-of-the-road, almost an under-the-radar. I would consider her chances to be on the lower end of the cast. Evvie got a lot of focus this episode, including some good signs in the edit. She introduced herself and her profession, and she gave many thoughts on the vote and her tribe, as well as how she will be perceived. We don't have a positive moment from her, but she has time in the season to get this. Her screen time, strategy and introduction earns her a complex personality rating, with solid chances to win. Jeannie didn't give us too much this episode. She got one very positive scene, however, introducing herself and telling us her backstory. She didn't get much else this episode, and one particularly negative note for her edit is her being shown that she didn't know what was happening at Tribal. Her rating for this episode is an over-the-top positive, with a more middle-of-the-pack chance of winning. Heather was barely shown at all this episode. Her only confessional was very late, and it was not introducing herself or positive, just narration about Danny. Heather earns an under-the-radar rating this week, with the lowest chance of the cast to win in my opinion. JD got the most screen time and focus of anyone in episode 1. He introduced himself to us, leading to very positive screen time. He also gave thoughts on how he wanted to play, and how he wanted the vote to go. Ricard did give him some negative SPV, but overall his tone for this week was positive. Receiving this much screen time in the premiere is not a great sign for his edit, so I would put his winning chances around middle of the pack. His rating this week is a complex personality positive. Liana gave us narration this episode, and told us that she was close to Evie in a confessional. She was also shown telling Tiffany she was a target, which ultimately was the right move as Tiffany stayed. She did not give us an introduction, but she had decent content this episode, leaving her around upper middle of the pack. She earns a middle-of-the-road rating this week. Naseer was shown on the barge in the beginning of the episode with a positive scene about him learning English through Survivor. He was then portrayed negatively later on in the episode trying to target Danny and Deshawn. There isn't much else here to look at, which is not a great look for his winning chances, as I doubt the winner would receive a negative scene in episode 1. He is around the bottom of the cast in terms of chances, and his rating is a middle-of-the-road mixed. Ricard gave a great confessional introducing himself on the beach, which was positively toned. The rest of his confessionals were not particularly complex, he mostly just called out JD. If he had more complexity, he would reach a complex personality, but ultimately, he is a middle-of-the-road positive this episode. This was a decent first episode for him, and I would put him near the top of the cast for winning chances. Shan got a lot of focus this episode, and ended up looking fantastic. She introduced herself to us, she told us how she was looking to play the game, and she gave her thoughts on the vote and how she stood in the game. In particular, wanting to play as a mafia pastor is a great insight into her game, which bodes well for her edit. The one thing she is lacking is a positive scene, but that can come later in the season easily. She earns a complex personality rating, and is at the top of the cast this episode. Sydney got some light focus this episode, but left us with some solid content. She introduced herself to the audience, and also gave thoughts on the prisoner's dilemma twist. Her biggest flaw is being on the least complex tribe, but that can change in future episodes. Her rating is a middle of the road, and I would have her near the top of the cast to win. Tiffany is one of our strongest premiere edits. She introduced herself to us, while also having a very positive scene, and telling us how she wants to play the game moving forward, by turning the Previvor into a survivor. She also was able to know she was safe, and showed agency by looking for the idol. Tiffany earns a middle-of-the-road positive rating this week, with winning chances at the top. Voce has a decent first episode, giving us an introduction to himself, as well as his thoughts on the sweat challenge. He made Danny and Deshawn look poor by willingly picking the sweat challenge, and was weary of Tiffany's social game. He didn't have a shining positive moment, and was not particularly complex, so he receives a middle-of-the-road rating, with chances in the upper middle of the pack. Xander is someone who gave us mostly narration surrounding the prisoner's dilemma twist, but nothing very complex this episode. There isn't much here to delve into, but he has the pieces to win, putting his chance at around the lower middle of the cast. His rating this week is a middle of the road. My contenders for this first week are Shan, Tiffany, Sydney, and Liana, but it's anyone's game at this point. Those are my thoughts on the Edgic this week, and I look forward to seeing how the edit progressed with the cast this season. Thanks for watching.